The sound of hooves pounding against hard, packed earth drew closer, as Prudence Keller pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the hayloft, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild animal desperate for escape. She could hear them below, 5 men whose faces were etched with cruelty, and whose hands were stained with the blood of her father. October 1877 had brought more than autumn winds to Jamestown, California. It had brought tragedy and terror to her doorstep. Prudence had fled her family's homestead after witnessing her father's murder, running blindly through the dusk until she found shelter in this barn on the outskirts of town. For 3 hours she had remained hidden, listening to the occasional movements of horses and the distant sounds of the men searching for her. They needed her dead, the only witness to their crime. "Check the barn again," a gruff voice called from outside. "Girl's gotta be somewhere." Prudence pulled her knees to her chest, pressing a hand against her mouth to stifle her breathing. At 22, she had known hardship: her mother's death from fever 4 years earlier, the struggle to maintain their small ranch with just her and Pa, but nothing like this. Nothing that sent ice through her veins and made each breath feel like it might be her last. The barn door creaked open below. Heavy boots scuffed against dirt and straw as one of the men entered. Prudence dared not move, even as dust tickled her nose and threatened to betray her with a sneeze. "Nothing here, Macklin," the man below called out. "Just that old mare and some chickens." "Check the loft," came the reply from outside. The wooden ladder groaned under new weight. Prudence frantically looked around for anything to defend herself with, her fingers closing around a rusted pitchfork. She wouldn't go easily. But before the intruder's head could appear above the loft floor, the barn door banged open again. "What the hell are you doing in my barn?" The new voice was deep and authoritative, carrying a calm menace that made even Prudence freeze. The man on the ladder paused. "Just looking for a runaway, mister. Girl killed her pa and we're bringing her to justice." "That right?" The newcomer's tone suggested he believed none of it. "Funny, because Sheriff Davies didn't mention any murders or passes when I saw him this afternoon." Prudence held her breath, hardly daring to hope. "This ain't your concern," the intruder growled, his foot reaching the next rung. A shot rang out, splintering the wooden rung just below the man's boot. He yelled and lost his grip, tumbling backward to the ground. "Next one goes through your knee," said the newcomer, whom Prudence still couldn't see from her position. "Get out of my barn. Now." "You've made a mistake," the fallen man snarled, scrambling to his feet. "There's 5 of us and one of you." "4 now," the deep voice corrected. "Your friend by the water trough won't be joining you anymore. And I count well enough to know those aren't odds in your favor when I'm the one holding the rifle." A tense silence followed. Prudence could hear harsh breathing and the shuffling of boots. "Macklin," the intruder finally called. "We got trouble." Boots pounded on hard, packed earth as more men approached the barn, but the newcomer didn't seem concerned. "You boys have exactly 10 seconds to clear my property," he stated, "or I start shooting. The sheriff might ask questions about one body. 5, he'll just help me bury you." Prudence couldn't believe what she was hearing. Who was this man standing between her and certain death? Murmured curses filtered up to the loft, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. A minute later, hoofbeats thundered away from the barn. The silence that followed was almost as frightening as the danger that had preceded it. Prudence remained motionless, uncertain whether this savior represented safety or a different kind of threat. "They're gone," the man below called out, his voice softer now. "But they'll be back with more men. You can come down now, whoever you are." When Prudence didn't respond, she heard him sigh. Then the ladder creaked again as he began to climb. "I'm coming up," he announced. "I'm not going to hurt you." A moment later, a face appeared at the edge of the loft. In the dim light filtering through the slats of the barn, Prudence made out a strong jawline shadowed with a day's worth of beard, keen eyes that missed nothing, and a weather-worn hat pushed back on his head. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work and hands that looked equally capable of gentleness and violence. "Well," he said softly upon seeing her, "you're not what I expected to find in my hayloft." His gaze dropped to the pitchfork clutched in her trembling hands. "Though I appreciate your determination to defend yourself," Prudence didn't lower her makeshift weapon. "They killed my father," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I saw them do it. They're not lawmen." The stranger nodded slowly and climbed all the way into the loft, careful to maintain some distance. "I figured as much. Those men are Harlan Macklin's gang. They've been terrorizing small ranches in the territory, forcing sales for pennies on the dollar to some eastern mining company." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair with hints of auburn where the dying sunlight caught it. "Name's Reese Harrington. This is my place." He gestured vaguely at the barn and presumably the property beyond. "And you would be Prudence," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Prudence Keller." "Well, Miss Keller, I suggest we get you to safety before Macklin returns with reinforcements. You can put down that pitchfork unless you're still planning on using it." For the first time since her father fell, something almost like a smile tugged at Prudence's lips. She lowered the pitchfork. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington." "Reese," he corrected, extending a hand to help her up. "We've got no time for formalities when there are murderers on our trail." His hand was warm and calloused when she took it, and Prudence felt an unexpected current pass between them, something beyond the fear and adrenaline of the moment. He pulled her to her feet with ease, but didn't immediately let go of her hand. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Prudence had the disorienting sense that her life had just changed course, irrevocably, not just because of the tragedy she'd witnessed or the danger she was in, but because of the man standing before her. Reese cleared his throat and released her hand. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," Prudence nodded. "My father taught me when I was a girl." Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "Good. We've got a long night ahead of us." As they descended from the loft, Prudence caught sight of her rescuer more clearly in the fading light. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and a rifle held casually but competently in his right hand. His blue shirt was dusty from the day's work, and his vest had seen better days, but there was a dignity to him that transcended his rugged appearance. "Where are we going?" Prudence asked as he led her toward the back of the barn where 2 horses waited her father's mare that she had ridden here, and a magnificent chestnut stallion that must belong to Harrington. "My ranch house first," Reese answered, checking the cinch on his saddle. "It's more defensible than this old barn. Then, once it's safe, we'll get you to town to talk to Sheriff Davies." He paused, looking at her torn dress and the dried blood her father's blood splattered across the fabric. "You're not hurt, are you?" Prudence shook her head, though in truth her entire being felt wounded. "Not physically." Reese's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Keller. No one should have to witness such a thing." "They shot him when he refused to sell," Prudence said, her voice hollow. "They didn't even give him a chance to think about their offer, just executed him in our front yard." She looked up at Reese, her eyes suddenly fierce despite her exhaustion. "I need to see them brought to justice." "And they will be," Reese promised, his voice hardening. "Harlan Macklin has been allowed to terrorize this territory for too long. Your testimony could be what finally stops him." He helped her mount her father's mare, then swung easily onto his own horse. As they rode out through the back of the barn, Prudence cast a nervous glance toward the road, but there was no sign of Macklin's men. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here," Reese explained as they set off at a steady trot, taking a route that kept them among the trees rather than in the open. "It's not much to look at, but it's mine. Paid for it free and clear last spring after 5 years of breaking my back." There was quiet pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own hands and sweat. Prudence knew that feeling, had seen it in her father's eyes when he surveyed their modest homestead. The thought of her father brought fresh pain. "My father built our place from nothing," she said softly. 15 years of work, and they destroyed it all in a moment." Reese glanced over at her. "Where was your ranch?" "Valley Creek, about 20 miles east of Jamestown." "Good land," Reese nodded. "I've ridden through there, seemed like prosperous country." "It was," Prudence confirmed, "until the mining companies started buying up everything they could. They found silver in the hills last year. And suddenly, your father's ranch became valuable for more than just cattle," Reese concluded grimly. "It's happening all over. The big Eastern companies think they can just take whatever they want." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Despite her grief and fear, Prudence found herself studying her companion when he wasn't looking. There was something compelling about the quiet confidence with which he carried himself, the calm competence he'd shown in handling Macklin's men. "How did you know they weren't lawmen?" she asked finally. Reese's mouth quirked into a brief half-smile. "Besides the fact that they were trespassing and ready to shoot me for questioning them, I've had run-ins with Macklin before. 3 years ago, they tried the same approach with my neighbor, Old Man Jenkins. I stepped in, and Macklin's been giving my place a wide berth ever since." "What did you do?" Prudence asked, curious despite herself. The smile that crossed Reese's face then was wolfish. "Let's just say 2 of his men went back to him missing some important parts of their anatomy, and I made it clear the same would happen to anyone who tried again." Prudence felt a strange shiver that wasn't entirely fear. There was something reassuring about being protected by a man capable of such decisiveness. "There's the house," Reese said, pointing ahead to where a solid 2-story structure stood in a clearing. Unlike many frontier homes, it wasn't a simple cabin but a proper house, with a wide porch and several windows. A large barn stood nearby, along with a corral and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. "You live here alone?" Prudence asked, surprised by the size of the establishment. "Got 3 hands who help with the cattle," Reese explained as they approached. "Good men. They've got quarters in the bunkhouse, but they're in town tonight. Saturday," he added by way of explanation. Under different circumstances, Prudence might have felt uncomfortable at the prospect of staying alone with a man she'd just met. But after what she'd been through, conventional propriety seemed a distant concern compared to survival. As they dismounted in front of the house, a dog came bounding around the corner, a large, rangy beast with one ear standing up and the other flopped over. "That's Copper," Reese said as the dog sniffed curiously at Prudence's skirts. "He's a better alarm than any watchman. Nothing gets past him." He led the horses to a hitching post and secured them before gesturing toward the house. "Come on inside. You look like you could use some food and rest." The interior of Reese's home was surprisingly comfortable. Practical furnishings were arranged around a large stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, and though everything was simple, it was clean and well-maintained. It was clearly a bachelor's residence, but one belonging to a man who took pride in his surroundings. "Sit," Reese instructed, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. "I'll get a fire started and see about some food." Prudence sank gratefully into the chair, the events of the day suddenly catching up with her as exhaustion swept through her body like a tide. She watched as Reese moved efficiently around the kitchen, striking a match to kindle the stove and retrieving food from a pantry. "I'm afraid it's just beans and bacon," he apologized. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's fine," Prudence assured him. "I haven't eaten since breakfast." While the food heated, Reese poured water from a pitcher into a basin and brought it to her with a clean cloth. "For your hands," he explained gently. Prudence looked down and realized with a start that her father's dried blood still stained her skin where she had tried to stem his wounds. The sight brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I couldn't save him," she whispered. "There was so much blood." Reese knelt beside her chair, his voice soft but steady. "Listen to me, Miss Keller. What happened to your father wasn't your fault. Men like Macklin, they're rabid dogs. They need to be put down, not reasoned with." "Prudence," she corrected him. "If I'm calling you Reese, you should call me Prudence." A small smile touched his lips. "Prudence, then." He handed her the cloth. "Clean up and we'll eat. Then we need to make plans." As she washed her hands, Prudence noticed Reese moving around the room, checking windows and door latches. He retrieved a shotgun from above the fireplace and loaded it methodically. "You think they'll find us here?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "I don't think so," Reese replied honestly, "but I don't take chances, especially not with someone else's life at stake." He met her eyes. "I promise you, Prudence, I won't let them hurt you." There was such certainty in his gaze that Prudence found herself believing him. In the space of a few hours, this stranger had become her lifeline in a world suddenly turned hostile and terrifying. They ate quietly, the simple meal tasting better than anything Prudence could remember. Perhaps it was just hunger, or perhaps it was the comfort of being relatively safe after hours of fear. "Tell me what happened," Reese said finally, pushing his empty plate aside. "Every detail you can remember." Prudence took a deep breath and recounted the events of the day, how 5 riders had appeared at their ranch around noon, asking to speak to her father. How their leader, Macklin, had presented himself as a representative of the Eastern Sierra Mining Company with an offer to buy their land. How her father had politely but firmly refused. "He told them our ranch wasn't for sale at any price," Prudence continued, her voice growing unsteady. That's when the tall one Macklin nodded to the others. "They just drew their guns and shot Pa, right there on our front porch." She swallowed hard. "I was inside, watching through the window. They didn't know I was home." "What did you do?" Reese prompted gently. "I ran out the back and hid in the root cellar until I heard them leave. They searched the house for the deed and property papers, but Pa kept those at the bank in Jamestown." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "When I thought it was safe, I saddled up my father's mare and rode toward town. But I saw them on the road ahead of me, so I cut across country and found your barn instead." Reese nodded thoughtfully. "You did well," he said. "Many would have panicked." "Oh, I panicked," Prudence admitted with a humorless laugh. "I just did it while running." The comment drew a genuine smile from Reese, a transformation that briefly lightened his serious features and revealed a warmth that surprised her. "We need to get you to Sheriff Davies," he said, returning to the practical matter at hand. "But not until we're sure it's safe. Macklin likely has men watching the roads into town by now." "What about my father?" Prudence asked, her voice breaking. "He's still—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Reese reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, covered her hand with his own. His touch was gentle despite the calluses and scars that marked his skin. "I'll send one of my men out to your ranch at first light," he promised. "He'll see to your father properly." The simple kindness of this offer, this understanding of what mattered to her beyond mere survival, brought fresh tears to Prudence's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Reese squeezed her hand once before withdrawing. "You should get some rest," he said, rising from the table. You can take my room upstairs. I'll sleep down here by the fire." Any token protest Prudence might have made was forestalled by a bone-deep weariness that made even standing seem a monumental task. Reese led her upstairs to a spare but comfortable bedroom dominated by a large four-poster bed. "There's a washstand through that door," he indicated, "and clean towels. I'm afraid I don't have any women's nightclothes," but he crossed to a chest of drawers and pulled out a folded shirt. "This might serve well enough for tonight." Prudence accepted the shirt with murmured thanks. It was only when Reese had closed the door behind him that she allowed herself to sink onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her like a wave. Her father was gone. Her home was likely destroyed or ransacked. Everything she had known and loved had vanished in a few horrific moments. And yet, amidst all this devastation, there was Reese Harrington, a stranger who had risked his life to save hers, who had offered protection when she needed it most. As Prudence washed away the dust and tears of the day and changed into the borrowed shirt that hung nearly to her knees, she found herself wondering about the man downstairs. What had shaped him into someone who would stand against 5 armed men for a person he didn't even know existed? Sleep, when it finally came, was troubled by nightmares, her father falling again and again, blood blossoming across his chest, his eyes wide with surprise and pain. Each time, Prudence woke with a start, heart racing, until finally, as the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, she gave up on rest entirely. Dressing quickly in her stained and torn dress, the only clothing she had, Prudence made her way downstairs. She found Reese already awake, stoking the fire and setting coffee to boil on the stove. "Morning," he greeted her, his voice rough with sleep. "How did you rest?" "Not well," Prudence admitted, "but better than I would have anywhere else." He nodded in understanding. "Coffee will be ready soon. And I've got biscuits from yesterday that aren't too hard if we heat them up." As they shared this simple breakfast, Prudence noticed Reese glancing periodically toward the window, his expression vigilant. "What's our plan?" she asked finally. "I sent Miguel one of my hands to your ranch at first light," Reese replied. "He'll see to your father and then ride to town to alert the sheriff. Meanwhile, you and I will stay put until we know it's safe to move." "But the longer we wait, the more time Macklin has to cover his tracks," Prudence protested. Reese's gaze was steady. "And the more time he has to set up an ambush for the only witness who can identify him." He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Your testimony is what will bring him down, Prudence. Keeping you alive to give it is the priority." There was logic in his argument that Prudence couldn't refute, though inaction chafed at her. She wanted to do something, anything, to avenge her father. A sudden commotion outside drew their attention. Copper was barking furiously, the sound urgent and aggressive. Reese was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Stay back from the windows," he instructed, moving to peer cautiously through the curtains. Prudence's heart hammered in her chest. "Is it them, Macklin's men?" "No," Reese said, his voice suddenly tight with tension. "It's worse. It's Macklin himself." Prudence moved to stand beside him, ignoring his warning. Through the window, she could see 5 riders approaching the house, 4 of them the same men who had been at the barn yesterday. And at their head, a tall figure on a black horse that she recognized all too well. Harlan Macklin had the lean, hungry look of a predator, with cold eyes set in a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. "He's found us," she whispered, fear constricting her throat. "Stay calm," Reese said, though his own posture was rigid with alertness. "The house is sturdy, they can't just ride in and take you." "Mr. Harrington," Macklin's voice rang out across the yard, "I believe you have something of mine in there." Reese's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he told Prudence. Don't show yourself." Before she could protest, he had moved to the front door, opening it just enough to step onto the porch while keeping his body shielded by the frame. The rifle in his hands was leveled with casual expertise. "You're trespassing, Macklin," Reese called out. "Again. I don't recall inviting you onto my property." Even from inside, Prudence could hear the cold laugh that followed. "Come now, Harrington. Let's be reasonable. The girl is a thief and a murderer. She killed her own father over a land dispute and stole valuable papers from his office. We're just bringing her to justice. Is that the story you've decided on?" Reese's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Because the lady tells a different tale, one that ends with you hanging for murder." A tense silence followed this declaration. When Macklin spoke again, the false affability had vanished from his tone, replaced by naked menace. "That girl is going to die, Harrington. The only question is whether you die with her." There was a pause. "But it doesn't have to be that way. The mining company I represent is prepared to be generous. Your ranch would fetch a handsome price, enough for you to start fresh somewhere far from here. All you have to do is turn over the Keller girl." Prudence held her breath, a treacherous doubt whispering in her mind. Would Reese sell her out to save himself? He barely knew her. After all, was her life worth risking his own? "Not interested." Reese's response came without hesitation. "Now get off my land before I put a bullet in you." Relief washed through Prudence, followed by a surge of something warmer: gratitude, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. "5 against 1, Harrington," Macklin called back. "Those odds don't favor you." "Maybe not," Reese conceded. "But I guarantee you'll be the first to die, Macklin. Are you willing to bet your life that your men care enough to avenge you?" Another silence stretched out, fraught with tension. Prudence crept closer to the door, wanting to see what was happening. "We'll be back," Macklin finally said. "With more men. And next time we won't be so polite." He wheeled his horse around. "Enjoy your temporary victory, Harrington. It won't last." Reese remained on the porch, rifle raised, until the 5 riders had disappeared down the road. Only then did he step back inside, closing and bolting the door. "They'll be back," he said grimly, turning to find Prudence standing just behind him. "And they'll bring enough men to overwhelm any defense I can mount here." "What do we do?" Prudence asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Reese ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. "We need to get you to town before they return. Sheriff Davies needs to hear your testimony, and you'll be safer in Jamestown with witnesses around." "But you said Macklin would be watching the roads," Prudence reminded him. A slow smile spread across Reese's face, the kind of smile that suggested he had an idea that was either brilliant or exceptionally foolhardy. "He'll be watching the roads," he agreed, "but there are other ways to reach Jamestown." As it turned out, Reese's plan involved traversing a treacherous mountain trail that few knew existed, a remnant of old mining expeditions that had been largely forgotten. "It's rough going," he warned as they hastily prepared to depart. "But it cuts directly to the back side of Jamestown. We can be there by mid-afternoon if we push hard." Prudence changed into clothes. Reese provided trousers and a shirt that belonged to his youngest ranch hand, which fit her well enough with a belt cinched tight at the waist. Riding astride in a dress would be impossible on the trail they faced. They left within the hour, Reese having scrawled a note for his returning hands explaining the situation. Copper remained at the ranch, much to the dog's visible displeasure. "He'd give us away with his barking if we ran into trouble," Reese explained as they rode out, taking a path that led immediately into the densely wooded foothills rather than following any established trail. The day that followed was one of the most physically challenging of Prudence's life. The path Reese chose was barely visible at times, a faint game trail that wound its way through steep ravines and over rocky ridges. They were forced to dismount frequently to lead the horses through particularly treacherous sections, and more than once Prudence found herself scrambling on all fours up slopes that seemed nearly vertical. Yet, despite the difficulty, there was something exhilarating about their flight. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that each step took them closer to safety. Or perhaps it was the companionship of the man who rode beside her, steady, resourceful, and unfailingly attentive to her needs, without ever making her feel weak or incapable. They stopped briefly around noon to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions. Reese had packed dried beef, hard biscuits, and canteens of water. "How much further?" Prudence asked, stretching her aching legs as they sat on a fallen log overlooking a spectacular vista of the valley below. "We're about halfway," Reese replied, studying the terrain ahead. "The worst of the climbing is behind us, but we still need to cross Broken Ridge before we descend to the valley." Prudence nodded, trying not to show how the muscles in her thighs trembled with fatigue. Growing up on a ranch, she was no stranger to hard work, but this kind of constant climbing was using muscles she rarely employed. Reese seemed to notice anyway. "You're doing well," he said, his voice gentle. "Many men would have complained by now." "I'm sure I'll feel it tomorrow," Prudence admitted with a small smile. "But I'd rather ache than die at Macklin's hands." Reese's expression darkened at the mention of Macklin. "That won't happen," he said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Prudence, a warmth that spread through her chest and momentarily banished the ache of grief that had become her constant companion since witnessing her father's murder. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Risking your life for a stranger. You could have just turned me over to Macklin and avoided all this trouble." Reese was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but resolute. "6 years ago, I watched men like Macklin murder my brother in Colorado. He refused to sell his claim when gold was discovered nearby." His hands clenched briefly. "I was in town when it happened. By the time I returned, it was too late." He turned to meet her eyes, and Prudence saw in them a pain that mirrored her own, the raw wound of losing someone beloved to senseless violence. "I couldn't save him," Reese continued, "but I tracked down the men responsible one by one. It took me 2 years." He didn't elaborate on what had happened to those men, but Prudence could guess. "When I came to California afterward, I swore I'd never stand by again if I could prevent such an injustice." His mouth curved in a humorless smile. "So you see, helping you isn't entirely selfless. It's a way of making peace with my own past." Prudence reached out impulsively and laid her hand over his. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said softly, "and grateful that his memory brought you to that barn yesterday." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition of shared pain but also of shared strength. Then Reese cleared his throat and stood, breaking the moment. "We should keep moving," he said, offering a hand to help her up. "I'd like to reach town before dark." They continued their journey, the trail gradually becoming less severe as they began their descent toward Jamestown. By late afternoon, exhaustion had settled into Prudence's bones, but she pushed on without complaint, driven by the knowledge that safety and justice lay ahead. It was nearing dusk when they finally caught sight of the town's outskirts. Jamestown was a substantial settlement by frontier standards, a proper main street lined with businesses, a church spire rising against the darkening sky, and scattered homes spreading outward from the center. "Sheriff's office is on the far side of town," Reese said as they approached. "We'll need to be careful. Macklin may have men watching." They skirted the edge of town, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. Prudence's heart pounded with each passing minute, expecting at any moment to hear shouts of discovery or the crack of gunfire. But they reached the modest building that served as both jail and sheriff's office without incident. A lamp burned inside, casting a warm glow through the windows. Reese dismounted and helped Prudence down, her legs so stiff she nearly collapsed when her feet touched the ground. "Easy," he murmured, his arm slipping around her waist to steady her. For a brief moment, Prudence leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. Prudence nodded and straightened, squaring her shoulders. "Ready." The sheriff looked up in surprise when they entered a stocky man in his 50s with graying hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Recognition flashed across his face when he saw Reese. "Harrington," he greeted with a nod. "What brings you to town at this hour?" His gaze shifted to Prudence, taking in her borrowed male clothing and exhausted appearance. "Sheriff Davies, this is Miss Prudence Keller," Reese said formally. "She's here to report a murder." Over the next hour, Prudence recounted her story once again: the arrival of Macklin and his men, her father's murder, her escape and subsequent pursuit. Sheriff Davies listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never doubting her account. "Damn shame about your father, Miss Keller," he said when she had finished. "Jacob Keller was a good man, honest as the day is long." "You knew him?" Prudence asked, surprised. "Not well, but well enough," Davies confirmed. "He came into town every month or so for supplies." The sheriff's expression hardened. "I've been hearing rumors about strong-arm tactics being used to acquire land for mining operations, but this is the first direct testimony I've had." "Will it be enough?" Reese asked. "To bring charges against Macklin," Davies sighed heavily. "It's a start." "Miss Keller's testimony is compelling, but Macklin has powerful friends. The mining company he represents has financial ties to the territorial governor." "So he gets away with murder?" Prudence demanded, anger momentarily overcoming her exhaustion. "I didn't say that," Davies replied mildly. "Just that we need to build a stronger case." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "There have been other suspicious deaths in the territory over the past year: ranchers who allegedly had accidents shortly after refusing to sell their land. If we can connect Macklin to those." "What about Prudence?" Reese interrupted. "She's in danger as long as Macklin knows she can identify him." The sheriff nodded gravely. "You're right about that. Miss Keller needs protection." He glanced at the small cells visible through the doorway behind his desk. "I can offer her a place here for tonight, but it's hardly suitable for a young lady for any length of time." "She can stay at my ranch," Reese said immediately. "It's defensible and my hands are reliable men." "Begging your pardon, Harrington, but your place is too isolated," Davies countered. "If Macklin brings enough men, you'd be overwhelmed before help could arrive." He considered for a moment. "No, she needs to be somewhere in town, where there are witnesses and where I can check in regularly." "I won't hide while my father's murderer walks free," Prudence interjected, her voice stronger than she felt. Both men looked at her with varying degrees of exasperation and admiration. "No one's suggesting you hide indefinitely, Miss Keller," the sheriff said kindly. "But until I can gather enough evidence to arrest Macklin, you need to stay safe." In the end, it was decided that Prudence would stay at the boarding house run by Mrs. Hollister, a formidable widow known for her strict rules and excellent cooking. The sheriff would spread word that she had continued on to Sacramento, hopefully throwing Macklin off her trail. "I'll escort you there myself," Davies said, rising from his desk. "Mrs. Hollister is discreet, and she keeps a shotgun under her counter that she's not afraid to use." The boarding house was a tidy two-story building on a side street. its windows glowing with warm lamplight. Mrs. Hollister, roused from her evening routine, turned out to be a tall, angular woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Prudence immediately found reassuring. "Of course the girl can stay," she declared after the sheriff explained the situation. "I've got a room at the back with its own entrance, easy to defend and hard to approach without being seen." Arrangements were quickly made, with Sheriff Davies paying for a week's lodging in advance. Throughout these discussions, Reese remained silent, his expression unreadable. Only when everything was settled did he finally speak. "I should get back to my ranch," he said, though his reluctance was evident. "My men will be wondering what's happened." Prudence felt a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving this man who had become her protector and ally in the space of a day. "When will I see you again?" she asked, immediately regretting how vulnerable the question sounded. Something softened in Reese's eyes. "I'll be back in town tomorrow," he promised. "There are some supplies I need anyway." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Try to rest, Prudence. You're safe here." Sheriff Davies tactfully busied himself with arranging something with Mrs. Hollister, giving them a moment of relative privacy in the entrance hall. "Thank you," Prudence said, trying to infuse those simple words with the depth of her gratitude. "For everything." "No need for thanks," Reese replied, his voice gruff with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Prudence disagreed firmly. "They wouldn't. What you did facing down those men, helping me escape, risking your own safety, that's not something anyone would do." A faint color rose in Reese's cheeks, visible even in the dim lamplight. "Well," he said awkwardly, "it needed doing." Before he could step away, Prudence impulsively rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his weathered cheek. "Be careful riding home," she whispered. "Macklin might still be watching the roads." Reese looked momentarily stunned by her gesture, then recovered with a slight clearing of his throat. "I'll take the back trails," he assured her. "Get some sleep, Prudence. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." With that, he nodded to the sheriff and Mrs. Hollister and departed, the door closing solidly behind him. Mrs. Hollister showed Prudence to a small but comfortable room furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. "Bathrooms down the hall," she explained briskly. "Breakfast at 7 sharp. And don't you worry about uninvited guests, miss. My shotgun and I have been keeping order in this house for 15 years. Left alone, Prudence sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past 2 days crashing over her in waves. Her father was dead. Her home was gone. She was in hiding from murderers. And yet, amidst all this chaos and loss, she had found an unexpected ally in Reese Harrington. As she washed away the dust of their journey and changed into a nightgown Mrs. Hollister had lent her, Prudence found herself thinking of Reese more than she probably should. The quiet strength in his hands, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the gentle way he had helped her when exhaustion had nearly overcome her. Sleep, when it finally claimed her, brought dreams not of her father's murder, but of a steadfast cowboy with kind eyes and a determined jaw who had climbed into a hayloft and changed the course of her life. The next week passed in a strange limbo of grief, anxiety, and unexpected moments of connection. True to his word, Reese returned to town the following day, ostensibly to purchase supplies but clearly to check on Prudence. They walked together through the small garden behind Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, Prudence finally attired in proper women's clothing again, thanks to the generosity of the landlady. "Sheriff Davies rode out to your ranch yesterday," Reese informed her. "Your father has been properly laid to rest in the small cemetery near your property. Miguel helped with the arrangements. Tears sprang to Prudence's eyes at this news. Grief for her father mingled with gratitude for the kindness of strangers. "I wish I could have been there," she whispered. "It wasn't safe," Reese reminded her gently. But the sheriff said a prayer for him, and they marked the grave properly. "When this is all over, you can visit." "If this is ever over," Prudence sighed. "Has there been any progress with the investigation?" Reese's expression tightened. "Davies is gathering testimonies from neighboring ranchers. Apparently, your father wasn't the first to receive a visit from Macklin, just the first to be killed outright. Others were beaten or had their livestock destroyed as warnings." "And still nothing has been done?" Prudence asked, indignation rising in her voice. "People were scared," Reese explained, though his own frustration was evident, "and without proof of who was responsible." He trailed off and they walked in silence for a few moments, each lost in thought. "What will you do?" Reese asked eventually. "After Macklin is brought to justice? Will you try to keep your father's ranch going?" The question caught Prudence off guard. She had been so focused on survival and vengeance that she hadn't thought beyond the immediate crisis. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not sure I could bear to live there alone with the memories of what happened. But it was my father's life's work. Selling it feels like a betrayal." Reese nodded in understanding. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "One step at a time." His steady presence beside her was oddly comforting, a rock in the storm that her life had become. Over the days that followed, Reese visited regularly, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book from his own collection when she mentioned being bored, fresh-picked wildflowers that he somewhat sheepishly presented one afternoon, a slice of apple pie from the town bakery that he knew she favored. Each visit deepened the connection between them, conversations flowing more easily as they shared pieces of their histories. Prudence learned about Reese's childhood in Missouri, his time as a Union soldier during the final year of the Civil War, despite his youth, his wandering years after his brother's murder, and his determination to build something lasting in California. In turn, she told him about growing up as an only child on a remote ranch, the early death of her mother from fever, and her dreams of someday becoming a teacher, a dream deferred by family obligation, but never abandoned. "You still could, you know," Reese pointed out one afternoon as they sat on the boarding house porch. "Jamestown has a schoolhouse but no permanent teacher. They've been making do with the preacher's wife for the past year, but she's expecting a child soon." Prudence smiled at the thought. "Perhaps. When all this is settled." "When all this is settled" became their unspoken refrain, a future that seemed simultaneously tantalizingly close and frustratingly distant as the days passed with no arrest, no resolution. Sheriff Davies was building his case methodically, gathering testimonies from other victims of Macklin's intimidation tactics, and tracing the connections between the mining company and various suspicious deaths throughout the territory. But legal wheels turned slowly, especially when influential people might be implicated. Meanwhile, Macklin and his men seemed to have vanished from the immediate area, which both relieved and unsettled Prudence. Had they given up their search for her, or were they merely regrouping for a more determined effort? The answer came violently on the 8th day of her stay at the boarding house. Prudence had been helping Mrs. Hollister with the weekly baking, finding unexpected solace in the simple domestic task of kneading bread dough. It was nearly sunset when a commotion erupted in the street outside, shouting voices, the sound of running feet, and then the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Mrs. Hollister moved with surprising speed for a woman of her years, snatching the shotgun from beneath the counter and positioning herself at the front window. "Stay back, Miss Keller," she ordered sharply. "Someone's shooting up the town." Prudence's heart hammered against her ribs as more shots rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass somewhere nearby. "It's Macklin," she whispered, certainty settling like ice in her stomach. "He's found me." Before Mrs. Hollister could respond, the back door burst open and Sheriff Davies appeared, his face grim and a revolver clutched in his hand. "Macklin's men are raiding the town," he confirmed tersely. "At least a dozen of them. They're searching buildings one by one." His gaze locked on Prudence. "They know you're still here." "How?" Mrs. Hollister demanded. "No one but us knew the girl was staying in town." "Someone talked," Davies replied grimly. "Doesn't matter who now. What matters is getting Miss Keller to safety." He turned to Prudence. "Is there anywhere in the house we can hide you?" "The cellar," Mrs. Hollister suggested immediately. "It's access through a trapdoor in the pantry. Easy to conceal." Prudence shook her head. "If they're searching thoroughly, they'll find me, and then you'll both be in danger for harboring me." "That's our concern, not yours," the sheriff said firmly. "No," Prudence insisted. "I won't have more people dying because of me. We need to leave town entirely." In this commotion, Mrs. Hollister looked skeptical. "They've likely got the roads watched." "Not all of them," Sheriff Davies said slowly, an idea clearly forming. "There's a service road behind the livery stable that leads to the old mining camp. If we could get Miss Keller there unseen." A new volley of gunfire, closer now, cut off his words. Shouts echoed from the main street, angry voices demanding information, threatening dire consequences for anyone harboring the Keller girl. "No time for planning," Davies decided. "We need to move now. Mrs. Hollister, can you create a distraction?" The older woman's eyes gleamed with unexpected ferocity. "With pleasure, Sheriff." What followed was a blur of frantic activity. Mrs. Hollister loaded both barrels of her shotgun while Prudence hastily gathered her few belongings. The sheriff led them through the kitchen to the back door, pausing to check that the alleyway beyond was clear. "I'll go first," Davies instructed. "Mrs. Hollister, give us 2 minutes, then make your move. Prudence, stay close to me and move quickly." Heart pounding, Prudence followed the sheriff into the gathering dusk, keeping to the shadows as they hurried down the narrow alley between buildings. They had almost reached the end when a shot rang out from the boarding house, Mrs. Hollister's distraction, right on schedule. Shouts of alarm erupted from the main street as Davies pulled Prudence around the corner toward the livery stable. They were halfway across the open yard when a mounted figure appeared at the far end, silhouetted against the last light of day. "There she is," the rider shouted, wheeling his horse around. "I found the girl," Sheriff Davies cursed under his breath, pushing Prudence behind him as he raised his revolver. "Run for the stable," he ordered. "Go." Prudence hesitated for only a second before obeying, her feet pounding against the hard, packed earth as she sprinted for the dark shelter of the livery. Behind her, she heard the exchange of gunfire, one shot, then another, followed by a cry of pain that she prayed wasn't from Davies. She reached the stable door and yanked it open, plunging into the dim interior that smelled of hay and horses. Several animals nickered nervously in their stalls, disturbed by the commotion outside. "Miss Keller," a voice called softly from the shadows. "Over here." Prudence froze, her blood turning to ice. She knew that voice. Harlan Macklin stepped into view, a cold smile playing on his lips and a revolver pointed steadily at her chest. "How predictable," he said, his voice almost conversational. "The sheriff tries to spirit you away while my men are distracted at the front of town. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate such a basic strategy?" Prudence backed away, her eyes frantically searching for any means of escape or defense. The stable was eerily empty of people, no stable hands, no customers, just her and the man who had murdered her father. "Where is everyone?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Macklin's smile widened. I paid the stable master to take the evening off. As for his boys, he shrugged eloquently. Let's just say they won't be interrupting us. A cold dread settled in Prudence's stomach. What do you want, Macklin? Originally, just your father's land, he replied with chilling honesty. Now, I want you dead and buried where no one will ever find you. His expression hardened. You've caused me considerable inconvenience, Miss Keller. The mining company is growing impatient with delays, and your continued existence threatens my very profitable arrangement with them. You'll hang for what you've done, Prudence said, her back now pressed against the wall as Macklin advanced slowly toward her. He laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. I think not. When this is over, the story will be that you killed your father for his property, then tragically took your own life out of remorse when justice closed in. He raised the revolver. A sad tale, but one that will satisfy the locals and, more importantly, conclude my business here neatly. Prudence closed her eyes, her thoughts turning to her father, to the brief happiness they had known despite hardship, to Reese Harrington and the future that might have been. She waited for the shot that would end her life. Instead, she heard the stable door crash open behind Macklin, followed by a voice that sent a flood of relief through her body. Drop the gun, Macklin, or I'll put a bullet through your spine. Reese stood in the doorway, his rifle leveled with deadly precision at Macklin's back, his expression a mask of cold fury. Macklin froze, his own gun still pointed at Prudence. Harrington, he acknowledged without turning around, this doesn't concern you. I'm making it my concern, Reese replied, his voice deceptively calm. Now drop the gun or I drop you. I won't ask again. For a breathless moment, Prudence thought Macklin might defy the order, might choose to shoot her even at the cost of his own life. Then, with deliberate slowness, he lowered his weapon. Kick it away, Reese instructed, moving deeper into the stable but maintaining his aim. Macklin obeyed, sending the revolver skittering across the floor toward Prudence, who quickly retrieved it. This changes nothing, Harrington, Macklin said, turning slowly to face Reese. You're interfering in legitimate business. The mining company, save it, Reese cut him off. Your legitimate business ends today. He glanced briefly at Prudence. Are you hurt? She shook her head. No. But Sheriff Davies, he was outside when one of Macklin's men spotted us. As if summoned by her words, the stable door opened again to admit Davies, looking somewhat worse for wear with blood staining one sleeve but otherwise intact. Got the bastard who was following you, he announced grimly, then registered the standoff before him. Well now, what have we here? Caught Macklin about to add another murder to his tally, Reese explained, not lowering his rifle. The sheriff nodded, drawing his own weapon despite his injured arm. Harlan Macklin, you're under arrest for the murder of Jacob Keller and conspiracy to commit additional crimes. His voice took on a note of satisfaction. We've got witnesses to your activities all over the territory, Macklin. Your days of terrorizing honest folk are over. To Prudence's surprise, Macklin didn't seem particularly concerned by this pronouncement. If anything, a smug confidence crept into his expression. You've got nothing but the word of a hysterical girl, he said dismissively. My associates in Sacramento will have me released within a week, and then, his gaze slid to Prudence with naked malice, I'll finish what I started. I wouldn't count on those associates, a new voice interjected. All eyes turned to the stable entrance, where a distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit stood flanked by two deputies. Despite his urban attire, there was something unmistakably authoritative in his bearing. Federal Marshal James Thornton, the newcomer introduced himself, showing a badge. Mr. Macklin, Your associates in Sacramento are currently enjoying the hospitality of federal custody on charges of corruption, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder." Macklin's smug confidence faltered visibly. "You're bluffing," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Marshal Thornton smiled thinly. "The Eastern Sierra Mining Company has been under investigation for months. Your activities here were simply the final evidence we needed." He nodded to his deputies. "Take him." As Macklin was handcuffed and led away, still protesting his innocence and threatening retribution, Prudence felt a curious emptiness replace the fear and tension that had sustained her for days. It was over. Her father's murderer was in custody. Justice would be served, and yet the victory felt hollow. Her father was still dead, her home still destroyed, her future still uncertain. "Are you all right?" Reese asked quietly, coming to stand beside her as the marshal conferred with Sheriff Davies. Prudence nodded mechanically. "Yes, just overwhelmed." Understanding filled his eyes. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her everything would be fine now. Instead, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder, a steady, anchoring presence that somehow meant more than words could have conveyed. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at him. "Now," he said gently, "you rest. And tomorrow or the next day or whenever you're ready, you start rebuilding." "Rebuilding what?" Prudence asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "My father's ranch, a life alone, what's the point?" Reese's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. "The point is that you're alive, Prudence, and while there's life, there's possibility." His eyes held her steadily. "You don't have to decide everything tonight." There was wisdom in his words that penetrated the fog of grief and exhaustion surrounding her. Prudence managed a small nod of acknowledgement just as Sheriff Davies approached. "Miss Keller," the sheriff said formally, "Marshal Thornton would like to speak with you when you're feeling up to it. Your testimony will be crucial in the federal case against the mining company executives." "Of course," Prudence agreed. "Whatever I can do to help." "In the meantime," Davies continued, "you're welcome to stay at my sister's house. It's more comfortable than the jail cell I can offer Macklin." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. "Thank you, but—" Prudence hesitated, glancing at Reese. "She can stay at my ranch," Reese offered quietly. "It's secure, and after the events of today, I doubt any of Macklin's remaining men will risk approaching it." The sheriff looked between them, something knowing flickering in his gaze. "That's for Miss Keller to decide," he said diplomatically. Prudence thought about returning to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, where the memory of fear and flight would linger in every corner. She thought about staying with strangers, however well-intentioned. And then she thought about Reese's ranch, the solid house with its bookshelves and fireplace, the wide open spaces beyond, and the man beside her whose steady presence had become a source of strength. "I'd like to accept Mr. Harrington's offer," she said with quiet certainty. Something flickered in Reese's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure, but he simply nodded. "We can leave whenever you're ready." The ride to Reese's ranch that night was undertaken in a silence that felt comfortable rather than strained. Both were exhausted by the day's events, and the simple fact of being alive and relatively safe seemed enough for the moment. When they arrived, Reese's ranch hands, alerted by the earlier commotion in town, greeted them with obvious relief. "Thought you might have gotten yourself shot, boss," said Miguel, a compact man with a ready smile. "Sheriff's deputy rode through earlier saying there was trouble." "Nothing we couldn't handle," Reese replied, helping Prudence dismount with gentle hands at her waist. "Miss Keller will be staying with us for a time. She's had a difficult day." The simple statement was met with nods of understanding and respect. No further explanation was requested or offered as Reese led Prudence into the house. "You remember where your room is," he said, lighting a lamp against the darkness. "I'll bring up some hot water for washing." Prudence nodded gratefully, too tired for words. She climbed the stairs to the bedroom she had briefly occupied before, finding it just as she remembered, clean, simple, and somehow comforting in its plainness. True to his word, Reese soon appeared with a steaming pitcher of water which he set on the washstand. "There's food if you're hungry," he offered, "or I can bring some up if you prefer to rest." "I'm not very hungry," Prudence admitted. "Just tired. In every way a person can be tired." Reese nodded in understanding. "Sleep then. Things often look clearer in the morning light." As he turned to leave, Prudence called after him softly. "Reese." He paused at the door, looking back. "Yes, thank you, again. It seems I'm always thanking you for saving my life." A small smile touched his lips. "Let's try to make it less of a regular occurrence." The jest, mild as it was, drew an answering smile from Prudence, perhaps the first genuine one since her father's death. "I'd like that," she agreed. With a final nod, Reese withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Alone, Prudence washed away the dust and fear of the day and changed into the nightclothes Mrs. Hollister had given her. As she slipped beneath the covers of the bed, she realized that despite everything, the grief, the trauma, the uncertainty of her future, she felt safe in a way she hadn't since her father's murder. It wasn't just the solid walls of Reese's house or the knowledge that Macklin was in custody. It was something about Reese himself, his unwavering support, his quiet strength, his willingness to stand beside her through danger without question or hesitation. As sleep claimed her, Prudence's last conscious thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, rebuilding might not be as impossible as it had seemed a few hours earlier. The days that followed took on a rhythm that was both healing and unexpectedly domestic. Prudence found herself falling into life at the Harrington Ranch with surprising ease. In the mornings, she helped prepare breakfast for Reese and his hands. During the day, she assisted with whatever tasks needed, doing mending, gardening, even learning to make cheese from the milk of Reese's small herd of dairy cows. Her testimony to Marshal Thornton was given at the ranch, rather than requiring her to return to town, a consideration for which she was grateful. The marshal was thorough but kind, taking detailed notes and assuring her that her father's murderers would face the full force of federal justice. "The mining company executives will likely try to claim ignorance of Macklin's methods," Thornton explained, "but we've uncovered financial records and correspondence that prove otherwise. Your testimony is the final piece we needed." Evenings at the ranch were quiet affairs, often spent in front of the fire with Reese, sometimes reading silently from his collection of books, sometimes talking about everything and nothing. Prudence found herself opening up about her hopes and fears, about memories of her parents, about her uncertainty regarding the future. Reese proved to be not just a good listener but a thoughtful advisor, never pushing his own opinions but offering perspectives she might not have considered. "You don't have to decide about your father's ranch immediately," he pointed out one evening as they discussed her options. "The land will still be there in a month or 6 or a year." "But what will I live on in the meantime?" Prudence asked practically. "I can't impose on your hospitality forever." Something flickered in Reese's eyes at that, an emotion Prudence couldn't quite identify. "You're not imposing," he said quietly. "Having you here has been pleasant." The understatement made her smile. "For me as well," she admitted. "But I need to find my own way forward." "What about teaching?" Reese suggested. "You mentioned it was something you'd always wanted to do." The idea took root in Prudence's mind, growing stronger in the days that followed. When Sheriff Davies visited to update them on Macklin's case, the murderer had been transferred to a more secure jail in Sacramento, Pending trial, Prudence broached the subject of Jamestown's need for a teacher. "It's true we've been looking," Davies confirmed. "Mrs. Patterson has been filling in, but with her baby coming next month, the town council's getting desperate." He studied Prudence thoughtfully. "You have the education for it." "I completed schooling in Sacramento before my mother's illness brought me back to the ranch," Prudence replied. "And I've kept up with reading and learning since." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I can speak to the council members. No promises, but I think they'd be receptive." A week later, Prudence found herself interviewed by the town council, 5 men of varying ages who seemed simultaneously desperate for a teacher and skeptical of her qualifications based primarily on her youth and gender. "Miss Keller, while we appreciate your interest," began Mr. Holloway, the most conservative of the council members, "teaching requires a certain maturity and life experience. With respect, Mr. Holloway," Prudence interrupted politely but firmly, "I've managed a ranch alongside my father since I was 16. I've buried both my parents. I've survived an attempt on my life and helped bring murderers to justice. I believe I have sufficient life experience to teach children their letters and numbers." A startled silence followed this declaration, broken by a bark of laughter from the youngest council member. "She's got you there, Holloway," he chuckled. "And beggars can't be choosers. Mrs. Patterson is counting the days until she can stop waddling up to that schoolhouse." In the end, the council voted unanimously to offer Prudence the position on a trial basis, beginning the following month. Reese was waiting outside the town hall when she emerged from the meeting, his expression carefully neutral. "How did it go?" he asked. "I got the position," Prudence replied, unable to suppress her smile. "Starting in October." Something like pride mingled with another emotion crossed Reese's face. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "You'll be an excellent teacher." "Thank you for encouraging me to pursue it," Prudence said as they walked toward where their horses were hitched. "I might not have had the courage otherwise." Reese shook his head. "You're one of the bravest people I know, Prudence Keller. You just needed a reminder of what you're capable of." His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine. Over the weeks of her stay at his ranch, something had shifted between them, the initial connection of shared danger evolving into deeper understanding and mutual respect. And at least on Prudence's part, something more that she hesitated to name even to herself. With her new position secured, Prudence knew she should be making arrangements to move into town. Mrs. Hollister had already offered her a permanent room at the boarding house at a reduced rate in consideration of her teaching salary. It was the sensible course of action. Yet as they rode back to the ranch together, Prudence found herself reluctant to broach the subject. The thought of leaving the safety and comfort she had found with Reese filled her with a strange melancholy. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson, Prudence finally forced herself to address the inevitable. "I should look into rooms at Mrs. Hollister's," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "Now that I have the teaching position secured." Reese was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "You could stay here," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "The ranch is only a 20-minute ride from the schoolhouse." Prudence's heart quickened at the offer. "That's very kind, but it wouldn't be proper, would it? A single woman living in a bachelor's home, even with the hands as chaperones." "No, I suppose it wouldn't," Reese agreed, a hint of resignation in his tone. He turned to face her then, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Unless—" He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words unusual for a man typically so direct. "Unless—" Prudence prompted softly, hardly daring to hope he meant what she thought he might. Reese took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Unless you weren't staying as my guest, but as my wife." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Prudence's breath caught in her throat as Reese continued, the words coming more freely now that he had taken the leap. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, "and you're still healing from everything that's happened. If you need time, or if you don't feel the same, I do," Prudence interrupted, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. "Feel the same, I mean." Relief and joy bloomed across Reese's face, softening the lines that worry and responsibility had etched there. "You do." Prudence nodded, her own smile growing. "I do. These past weeks, despite everything that brought me here, have shown me what it means to find someone who truly sees me, who stands beside me rather than trying to shelter me from the world." Reese reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the hand of a man who worked hard and cared deeply. "I never expected to find someone like you, Prudence Keller," he said softly. "After my brother died, I thought I'd live out my days alone on this ranch. But then you appeared in my hayloft, ready to fight the world with a rusty pitchfork." His lips quirked in a smile at the memory. "And suddenly being alone didn't seem appealing anymore." "Is this a proper proposal, Mr. Harrington?" Prudence asked, her tone teasing despite the tears of happiness threatening to spill. Reese's expression grew serious again. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and to Prudence's astonishment, knelt before her. "Prudence Keller," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise a life without hardship, this land demands too much for that, but I can promise to face whatever comes beside you, to respect your dreams as my own, and to love you faithfully for all the days we're granted." The sincerity in his words moved Prudence deeply. This was no impulse, no mere solution to a practical problem. This was a man offering his heart completely, asking for hers in return. "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Yes, Reese Harrington, I will marry you." The smile that transformed his face then was like the sun breaking through clouds, radiant and warming. He rose, drawing her up with him, and with gentle reverence framed her face with his hands. "May I?" he asked softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Prudence closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared emotion. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, as hers wound around his neck. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Reese rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured. "I think I have since that first day when you looked at me with such fierce determination despite your fear." "And I love you," Prudence replied, the words feeling both momentous and perfectly natural. "For your courage, your kindness, and your respect." They stood together on the porch as twilight deepened into night, planning their future in quiet conversation. They would marry before Prudence began teaching a simple ceremony with Sheriff Davies and Mrs. Hollister as witnesses, perhaps. Prudence would ride to the schoolhouse each day from the ranch, returning home to Reese in the evenings. "And your father's land?" Reese asked gently. "Have you decided what you want to do?" Prudence considered the question, which no longer seemed as insurmountable as it once had. "I think I'd like to keep it," she said slowly. "Not to live there, I don't think I could, but perhaps we could incorporate it into your ranch operations eventually. It would be a way to honor my father's work while building something new." Reese nodded thoughtfully. "We could do that. The Valley Creek land would complement what I have here. Together, they'd make a substantial operation." "Together," Prudence echoed, liking the sound of the word on her lips. "That seems to be the theme of our future." The wedding took place 2 weeks later on a crisp October morning. True to their wishes, it was a small affair, just Sheriff Davies, Mrs. Hollister, Reese's ranch hands, and a few townspeople who had come to respect Prudence during her ordeal. The ceremony was held in the town's small church, with the elderly minister presiding. Prudence wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Hollister had helped her select from the town's dry goods store, not white, as neither of them felt the need for traditional trappings, but beautiful nonetheless. Reese, for his part, looked uncommonly handsome in a black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt, spoken with clear voices that carried to the rafters of the little church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reese's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, drawing a few good-natured cheers from the small assembly. The modest celebration afterward at the town's only restaurant was filled with genuine goodwill, and even moments of laughter, a welcome change from the tension and fear that had marked Prudence's arrival in Jamestown. "Never seen Harrington smile so much," Sheriff Davies commented to Mrs. Hollister as they watched the newlyweds accept congratulations. "Man's been a lone wolf since he arrived in these parts." "Takes the right woman," Mrs. Hollister replied sagely, "and she's found the right man. After what that girl's been through, she deserves some happiness." As if aware of their scrutiny, Prudence glanced over at that moment, her face radiant with a joy that transcended the simple pleasures of the day. This wasn't just a wedding celebration, but a marking of survival, of justice served, of new beginnings wrested from tragedy. Later that afternoon, as they rode side by side back to what was now their shared home, Prudence felt a sense of peace settling over her that she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. "Happy, Mrs. Harrington?" Reese asked, noticing her contemplative expression. The new name sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Very happy, Mr. Harrington," she replied with a smile, "though it may take some time to get used to my new name." "We have time," Reese said simply, reaching across the space between their horses to take her hand briefly. "All the time we need." And they did have time to build a life together that neither had imagined possible before fate and tragedy had brought them into each other's orbit. Prudence began teaching at the Jamestown school, quickly winning over even the most reluctant students with her combination of firm expectations and genuine interest in their progress. Reese expanded his cattle operation to include her father's land, hiring additional hands to manage the increased workload. The trial of Harlan Macklin and the mining executives took place in Sacramento the following spring, with both Prudence and Reese traveling to testify. Justice, when it came, was satisfying in its completeness. Macklin sentenced to hang for multiple murders, the corrupt businessmen facing substantial prison terms for their role in the conspiracy. "It's over," Reese said quietly as they left the courthouse after the verdict. "Truly over now." Prudence nodded, feeling the last weight of fear lifting from her shoulders. "Yes, we can focus entirely on the future now." That future unfolded with both expected joys and surprising developments. A year into their marriage, Prudence discovered she was expecting their first child, news that transformed Reese from a typically reserved rancher into an openly exuberant, expectant father. "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Prudence asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen. "Healthy," Reese replied immediately. "Beyond that, I have no preference." He paused, then added with a half-smile, "Though I suspect a daughter with your spirit would be a formidable force in this world." Their son, James Jacob Harrington, arrived on a stormy night in February 1879, with Mrs. Hollister serving as midwife and Reese pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door until the infant's lusty cries announced his arrival. "He has your eyes," Prudence murmured as Reese held their son for the first time, his large hands cradling the tiny form with infinite gentleness. "And your determination," Reese replied, noting the way the newborn's tiny fists waved in protest at the bright light. "Poor child got the worst of both of us," Prudence laughed, tired but radiantly happy. "Or the best, depending on how you look at it." Life settled into new rhythms with the baby's arrival. Prudence took a leave from teaching, focusing on motherhood with the same dedication she had shown in the classroom. Reese proved to be a natural father, as comfortable soothing a colicky infant as he was managing recalcitrant cattle. 2 years later, their family expanded again with the arrival of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, who from her earliest days showed signs of inheriting her mother's independent spirit and her father's quiet determination. As the children grew, so did the Harrington Ranch, becoming one of the most prosperous in the region. Reese's fair treatment of his workers and honest business practices earned him respect throughout the territory, while Prudence's eventual return to teaching part-time with the children accompanying her to school when they were old enough made her a beloved figure in the community. They never forgot how their story began in fear and tragedy, with 5 men hunting a frightened young woman and a solitary rancher climbing into a hayloft to find an unexpected future. Each year on the anniversary of their meeting, they would ride together to the little cemetery where Jacob Keller rested, bringing wildflowers and quiet remembrance. "He would have liked you," Prudence told Reese on one such visit, as their children played nearby under the watchful eye of Miguel, who had remained a loyal friend and employee through the years. "My father. He valued honesty and hard work above all else." "I would have respected him," Reese replied, his arm around her shoulders, "for raising a daughter with such courage and integrity. Life on the frontier was never easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers. But through it all, Reese and Prudence faced each challenge as they had from the beginning together, drawing strength from each other's resilience and faith in their shared future." By the time James was 10 and Elizabeth 8, the Harrington Ranch had grown to encompass over 1,000 acres, with a reputation for quality cattle that brought buyers from as far away as San Francisco. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, though Reese had insisted on preserving the original structure that had first sheltered Prudence in her time of need. "It's where our story began," he explained when questioned about his sentimental attachment to the old rooms. "Some places hold memories too precious to alter." On a warm evening in the summer of 1887, 10 years after they had first met, Reese and Prudence sat on the same porch where he had proposed, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Did you ever imagine this?" Prudence asked softly, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the years. "That day when you found a stranger hiding in your hayloft, did you ever think it would lead to this life?" Reese's fingers intertwined with hers, the gesture as natural as breathing after a decade together. "Never," he admitted with a small smile. "I was just trying to clear my barn of troublemakers. Finding you was unexpected." "The best unexpected thing that ever happened to me," Prudence murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. "To us both," Reese agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "To us both." As night fell fully over the Harrington Ranch, the stars emerged in brilliant profusion above them, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, and now blessed their continuing journey together. Whatever the future held, they would face it as they had faced the past, with courage, with determination, and with an abiding love that had been forged in danger but had flourished in peace. From a desperate hiding place in a dusty hayloft to a life rich with purpose and love, theirs was a story neither could have written alone, but one they had created together, word by word and day by day, turning tragedy into triumph through the simple, profound act of choosing each other, again and again, through all the seasons of their shared life.